I was exactly 7 days away from my 30-year pension when my boss called me into his office and destroyed my life with 8 words. We're restructuring the department. Your position is eliminated. But what Marcus Peterson didn't know was that I kept copies of everything, and his own emails were about to send him to federal prison. My name is Robert Mitchell, and I should have seen the trap coming when my boss started asking weird questions about my retirement plans. For 29 years and 11 months, I'd been the guy who kept Peterson Manufacturing running smoothly. When machines broke down at 2 a.m., they called me. When new employees needed training, they sent them to my station. When corporate inspectors showed up asking tough questions, management put me in front of them because I knew every bolt and wire in that facility. But 3 weeks ago, Derek Walsh started acting strange. Derek was my direct supervisor, a guy I'd trained from day one, when he was fresh out of college with his business degree and zero real-world experience. I taught him how to read production schedules, how to handle vendor contracts, how to deal with union representatives without creating problems. For 5 years, he'd come to me whenever he faced a situation he couldn't handle alone. Then suddenly, he was asking questions that made no sense. How much vacation time did I have saved up? Had I been thinking about when I might want to retire? Did I know exactly when my 30-year anniversary would hit? When I told him it was next Friday, his face went pale, and he quickly changed the subject. Yesterday morning, Derek called me into Conference Room B, the small one they use for disciplinary meetings and terminations. I walked in expecting maybe a discussion about overtime policies or the new safety regulations. Instead, Derek was sitting there with Linda Harrison from Human Resources, both of them looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. "Robert, we need to discuss some organizational changes," Derek said, not meeting my eyes. He was shuffling papers on the table, the same nervous habit he'd had since I first met him. "Corporate has mandated some restructuring in our department." I knew what was coming before he said it. You don't survive nearly 30 years in manufacturing without recognizing the setup for bad news. The formal language, the HR presence, the way Derek kept looking at his hands instead of my face. "Your position is being eliminated, effective immediately." The words hit me like a physical blow. 29 years, 11 months, and exactly 1 week before my pension fully vested. 1 week before I could walk away with full benefits and financial security for the rest of my life. "Derek, you know I'm 7 days away from my 30-year mark. Understand this is difficult timing," he replied, still not looking at me. "But these decisions come from corporate level. Nothing I can control." Linda slid the termination paperwork across the table. Standard stuff. Final paycheck calculations, insurance continuation options, return of company property procedures. But when I looked at the service calculation, something was wrong. According to their numbers, I had 29 years and 10 months of service, not 11 months. "This calculation is incorrect," I said, pointing to the line. "I started here December 15th, 1995. That puts me at 29 years and 11 months as of today." Derek and Linda exchanged a quick glance. "We'll double-check that," Linda said. "But the termination stands regardless." I signed where they told me to sign, handed over my security badge and keys, and walked out past the production floor where guys I'd trained for decades were working, completely unaware that the person who'd shown them everything they knew was getting thrown away like broken equipment. But as I sat in my truck in the parking lot, staring at that building where I'd spent half my adult life, my mind was racing. The timing wasn't coincidence. The miscalculated service record wasn't an accident. And Derek's nervous behavior over the past 3 weeks suddenly made perfect sense. Someone had planned this very carefully, and they'd made one critical mistake. I spent the weekend going through every piece of employment documentation I'd kept over the years. Pay stubs, performance reviews, benefit statements, company policy updates. My wife always told me I was too organized for my own good, but her advice about keeping detailed records was about to pay off in ways neither of us could have imagined. The math was crystal clear. I'd started at Peterson Manufacturing on December 15th, 1995. Today was December 8th, 2024. Simple arithmetic put me at 29 years, 11 months, and 24 days of service. 7 days short of the 30-year mark that would trigger full pension benefits. But the termination paperwork showed 29 years and 10 months. Someone had deliberately shorted me by 1 month, hoping I wouldn't notice or wouldn't fight back. Monday morning, I called Janet Morrison. She'd worked in Peterson's Human Resources Department for 15 years before retiring last year, and she'd always been straight with employees about their rights and benefits. If anyone would know whether what happened to me was legal, it would be Janet. "Robert, that stinks worse than a dead fish," she said after I explained the situation. "You don't eliminate someone's position 1 week before their pension vests unless you're deliberately trying to avoid paying benefits." Janet had heard similar stories through her professional network. Companies getting aggressive about cutting long-term costs, targeting older employees who represented significant benefit obligations. Most people just accepted their termination and moved on, never realizing they'd been victims of calculated fraud. "Do you still have contacts inside Peterson?" I asked. "A few people who trust me. Let me make some quiet inquiries." Tuesday afternoon, Janet called back with news that made my hands shake with anger. She'd spoken with someone still working in HR, someone who'd been increasingly uncomfortable with recent management decisions. "Robert, you weren't the only one. They've terminated 3 other longtime employees in the past 6 months, all within weeks of major benefit milestones. And there's documentation." The person in HR had been keeping copies of internal communications, worried they might be the next target. What they'd shared with Janet was explosive. Email exchanges between Derek and Marcus Peterson, the owner's son who'd taken over operations 2 years ago, discussing specific employees by name and projected savings from early terminations. Marcus has been systematically reviewing employment files of anyone approaching significant benefit thresholds, Janet continued. He's looking for ways to cut long-term costs, and he's been consulting with outside legal counsel about the best timing to avoid challenges. My name had come up in multiple email discussions over the past 3 months. They've been planning my termination since September, waiting for the optimal moment to maximize savings while minimizing legal risk. "Janet, do you think this person in HR would be willing to share those emails with federal investigators?" "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd ask." She explained how benefit interference cases worked. The Department of Labor took them seriously, especially when there was documentary evidence of systematic targeting. Companies could face substantial fines, and individuals involved could face criminal charges for conspiracy to defraud employees of earned benefits. "But Robert, you need to understand something. Once you file a complaint, there's no going back. Marcus Peterson is going to know you didn't just walk away quietly, and he's going to fight back hard." I thought about Derek's nervous behavior, about the miscalculated service record, about 29 years of loyalty repaid with calculated betrayal. I thought about the 3 other employees who'd been targeted, and how many more might follow if nobody stood up to what Peterson Manufacturing was doing. "Janet, what Marcus Peterson doesn't understand is that I didn't survive 30 years of manufacturing by backing down when things got difficult." The email that Janet showed me Wednesday morning made my blood turn to ice, but also filled me with a dangerous kind of hope. She'd printed it on plain paper, no company letterhead, but I recognized Peterson Manufacturing's internal email format immediately. The message was from Marcus Peterson to Derek Walsh, dated 3 months before my termination. "Review attached spreadsheet of employees approaching benefit thresholds. We need documented justification for early separation before pension obligations activate. Priority targets highlighted for immediate action." My name was highlighted in bright yellow. "How did your contact get this?" I asked Janet as we sat in her kitchen. The email spread between us like evidence at a crime scene. "Someone in HR has been copying everything since Marcus took over operations. They're scared they'll be next, and they want protection if this situation explodes." The email chain continued for weeks after that initial message. Marcus and Derek discussing my work performance, looking for any excuse to justify termination. They'd even brought in an outside law firm to advise them on timing strategies that would minimize legal exposure. One email made me physically sick. Derek writing to Marcus, "Mitchell has clean performance record, no disciplinary issues, consistently meets production targets. Recommend position elimination approach rather than cause-based termination." Marcus's response was cold and calculated. Agreed. Restructuring gives us cleaner legal position. Schedule for December 8th, 1 week before pension vesting. Document business necessity thoroughly. These people had spent months planning how to destroy my retirement while I was coming in early, staying late, training their new employees, and fixing their problems. They treated my 30-year career like a math problem that needed solving. But they'd made one critical error that would cost them everything. Janet, they documented their entire conspiracy in company emails. Every step, every decision, every calculated move to defraud me of earned benefits. That's exactly right, she said. And federal investigators love cases where the evidence is already organized and time-stamped. She explained how Department of Labor investigations worked. They could subpoena email servers, interview employees under oath, and trace the decision-making process from initial planning to final execution. When companies were stupid enough to document benefit fraud in writing, prosecutions became straightforward. But Robert, once you file this complaint, Peterson Manufacturing is going to hire expensive lawyers and try to destroy your credibility. They'll claim you were a problem employee, that your termination was justified, that this is just a disgruntled worker making false accusations. I looked at the emails again, at the casual way Marcus and Derek had discussed eliminating me to save money, at the months of planning that had gone into betraying my loyalty. Janet, I've got 29 years of clean performance reviews, perfect attendance records, and commendations from management. Let them try to rewrite history. She made the call to the Department of Labor that afternoon, speaking with an investigator who specialized in employee benefit cases. Within 2 hours, I had an appointment scheduled for Friday morning. Agent Lisa Crawford wants to review all your employment documentation, Janet told me after hanging up. She says cases like this can move quickly when there's clear documentary evidence. I spent Thursday night organizing every piece of paperwork from my Peterson. Agent Lisa Crawford from the Department of Labor moved faster than I ever expected. And by Thursday morning, she was sitting across from me in a government conference room that smelled like old coffee and fluorescent lights. What she told me in the first 5 minutes made my hands shake with a mixture of rage and vindication. Mr. Mitchell, we've been watching Peterson Manufacturing for 8 months. Your complaint gave us the final piece we needed to move forward with criminal charges. She spread a stack of documents across the metal table between us. Email printouts, financial spreadsheets, organizational charts with names highlighted in different colors. It looked like the evidence board from a crime investigation, which I guess it was. You weren't the first person Marcus Peterson targeted, Agent Crawford continued. We've identified 17 employees who were terminated under suspicious circumstances over the past 2 years, all of them within weeks of major benefit milestones. The scope of what Marcus had been doing hit me like a physical blow. 17 people. 17 families who'd been betrayed by a company they'd served faithfully for decades. The calculated cruelty of it was breathtaking. Agent Crawford, how did you find out about the others? Anonymous tip from someone inside Peterson's HR department 6 months ago. They were scared about what they were seeing, but didn't know how to report it safely. When your complaint came in with specific documentation, everything clicked into place. She showed me a spreadsheet that Marcus had created, labeled Workforce Optimization Analysis. It was a coldly efficient document that listed every employee over 55, their years of service, projected benefit costs, and recommended action timelines. My name was in row 12, with notes about my high pension liability and optimal separation window. Marcus Peterson documented his entire conspiracy, Agent Crawford said. Every email, every planning meeting, every calculated decision to defraud employees of earned benefits. In 20 years of investigating employment fraud, I've never seen someone be this careless with evidence. She explained how the investigation had unfolded. The anonymous HR tipster had been copying emails and documents for months, building a comprehensive file of Marcus's activities. When federal investigators subpoenaed Peterson's email servers, they found hundreds of additional communications that painted a clear picture of systematic benefit fraud. Mr. Mitchell, Marcus Peterson wasn't just stealing from individual employees. He was running a scheme that defrauded the federal pension insurance system, violated multiple employment protection laws, and constituted organized conspiracy to commit wire fraud. The penalties were severe. Criminal charges carrying up to 15 years in federal prison, plus civil fines that could reach millions of dollars. Peterson Manufacturing faced potential bankruptcy if the full scope of damages was calculated. What happens next? I asked. We're filing federal charges against Marcus Peterson and Derek Walsh within the next week. Both of them will be arrested and arraigned on conspiracy charges. We'll also be seizing Peterson Manufacturing's financial records and placing the company under federal oversight. But Agent Crawford had more news that would turn everything upside down. Mr. Mitchell, there's something else you need to know. Marcus Peterson's scheme wasn't just about saving money on employee benefits. He was inflating the company's apparent profitability to attract potential buyers. She showed me documents that made my blood run cold. Peterson Manufacturing had been secretly negotiating a sale to a larger corporation for the past year. Marcus had been systematically eliminating high-cost employees to make the company's financial projections look more attractive to potential buyers. He was planning to sell the company and pocket millions while leaving hundreds of employees without the benefits they'd earned over decades of service. The betrayal was even deeper than I'd realized. Marcus hadn't just been stealing from current employees. He'd been preparing to abandon everyone who'd built Peterson Manufacturing into a successful business. Agent Crawford, when you arrest Marcus Peterson, what kind of evidence will you present? Everything. The emails planning your termination, the spreadsheets calculating benefit savings, the communications with legal counsel about timing strategies, and the broader conspiracy to defraud the pension insurance system. She pulled out a thick folder labeled Peterson Manufacturing Criminal Evidence File. It contained over 300 pages of documentation spanning 2 years of systematic employee fraud. Marcus Peterson created a paper trail that reads like a confession. Every step of his conspiracy is documented in his own words, with dates, amounts, and specific targeting criteria. Friday afternoon, Derek Walsh called me again. This time his voice wasn't just nervous, it was desperate. Robert, please, you have to call off the federal investigators. This whole situation has gotten completely out of control. Derek, I didn't call them off when you fired me 7 days before my pension vested. Why would I call them off now? Because Marcus is talking about shutting down the entire company rather than face criminal prosecution. 200 people could lose their jobs because you couldn't just accept your termination and move on. The audacity was stunning. Derek was trying to blame me for the consequences of his and Marcus's criminal conspiracy. They'd spent months planning to defraud employees, then acted surprised when their victims fought back. Derek, Marcus Peterson, created this situation when he decided to steal from his own employees. The federal investigators are just doing their job. Robert, we can settle this without destroying everyone's livelihood. Marcus has authorized me to offer full restoration of your pension benefits, plus additional compensation. How much additional compensation? $50,000, plus we'll rehire you at your previous position with a promotion to senior supervisor. I almost laughed. After months of planning my termination, after documenting their conspiracy in hundreds of emails, after systematically defrauding 17 employees, they thought they could buy their way out of federal criminal charges with $50,000. Derek, tell Marcus Peterson that he can explain his workforce optimization strategy to a federal judge. Monday morning, Agent Crawford called with news that would end Marcus Peterson's criminal career forever. We're executing arrest warrants this afternoon. Marcus Peterson and Derek Walsh will be in federal custody by evening. The federal indictment hit Peterson Manufacturing like a bomb on Tuesday morning in March, and Derek Walsh called me exactly 37 minutes after the news broke. His voice was shaking so badly I could barely understand him. Robert, please, we need to talk. This whole thing has gotten completely out of control. I was sitting in my workshop, sanding a bookshelf I'd been building for my daughter, when my phone rang. The feel of smooth wood under my hands kept me calm as Derek's panic poured through the speaker. Has it gotten out of control, Derek? Look, I know you're angry, but involving federal prosecutors was unnecessary. We could have worked this out between us, like professionals. The irony was perfect. Derek wanted to act like professionals now, after he and Marcus had spent months plotting to steal my pension like common thieves. The Department of Labor investigation had moved faster than anyone expected, and the evidence was so overwhelming that federal prosecutors filed criminal charges within 6 weeks. Marcus Peterson and Derek Walsh were facing conspiracy to defraud employees of earned benefits, wire fraud for using company email systems to plan the scheme, and violation of federal employment protection laws. The maximum sentence was 15 years in federal prison. Derek, you had 30 years to treat me like a professional. You chose to treat me like a problem that needed eliminating. Robert, please just listen. Marcus made mistakes, but he's not a criminal. He was trying to save the company money during a difficult period. I almost laughed. The company wasn't struggling financially. Peterson Manufacturing had just posted record profits and landed the biggest contract in company history. Marcus wasn't trying to save a failing business. He was trying to pad his own bonus by cutting employee benefits. Derek, how much money did Marcus calculate he'd save by firing me 1 week before my pension vested? Silence on the other end of the line. The federal investigators found those spreadsheets. Derek, $87,000 in pension obligations, plus healthcare costs. Marcus was willing to destroy my future to save less than $100,000. What Derek didn't know was that the investigation had uncovered something much bigger than my individual case. The Department of Labor had found evidence that Peterson Manufacturing had systematically targeted 17 longtime employees over the past 2 years, all terminated within months of major benefit milestones. The total fraud exceeded $1.2 million in stolen benefits. Agent Crawford had called me the previous Friday with updates that made my head spin. They'd seized Marcus's personal computer and found detailed financial projections showing how much the company could save by eliminating older employees before their benefits fully vested. Marcus had even created a presentation for the board of directors titled Workforce Optimization Through Strategic Separations. My name was on slide 12, along with projected savings and recommended termination timing. Derek, the federal prosecutors aren't interested in working anything out. This is going to trial. Robert, Marcus has hired the best defense attorneys money can buy. They're going to argue that all terminations were legitimate business decisions based on performance and necessity. But Marcus's expensive lawyers couldn't argue with his own emails. The prosecution had hundreds of pages of documentation showing premeditated planning, calculated timing, and deliberate deception. Marcus had literally written down his plan to defraud employees, then followed through with methodical precision. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I testified on Thursday of the second week, walking the jury through my employment history and the suspicious circumstances of my termination. The prosecution showed the email evidence piece by piece, building an unshakable case of intentional fraud. Marcus's defense team tried to paint him as a young executive making difficult but necessary business decisions. They argued that the terminations were coincidental timing, that the company faced legitimate financial pressures, that no fraud was intended. The jury didn't buy it. When you document your conspiracy to steal employee benefits in dozens of emails, claiming innocence becomes impossible. The verdict came down on a Friday afternoon. Guilty on all counts for both Marcus Peterson and Derek Walsh. Marcus was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison plus 2 years supervised probation. Derek received 8 months and permanent disbarment from working in human resources. Peterson Manufacturing was fined $1.8 million and ordered to provide full restitution to all affected employees, including immediate benefit vesting and additional compensation for damages. But the real victory came 2 weeks later when something happened that I never expected. Tom Peterson called me on a Wednesday evening while I was finishing the bookshelf in my workshop, and his voice carried the weight of a man whose world had collapsed around him. At 83 years old, the company founder sounded exhausted and ashamed. Robert, I owe you an apology that I can never fully give. What my son did to you and the other employees is the worst thing that's happened in my 45 years of running this company. I set down my sandpaper and listened. Tom Peterson had built his manufacturing business from nothing, starting with 3 employees in a rented garage and growing it into a regional powerhouse that employed over 200 people. He'd always prided himself on treating workers fairly, offering good benefits, and creating the kind of workplace where people could build careers. Tom, I appreciate you calling, but your son made his choices. He knew exactly what he was doing. That's what makes this so hard to accept. I raised Marcus to understand that our employees aren't just labor costs on a spreadsheet. They're the people who built this company, who sacrificed for our success, who deserved our loyalty in return. Tom explained how the scandal had devastated Peterson Manufacturing. The federal investigation had triggered a complete audit of company practices, customer confidence had plummeted, and several major contracts had been canceled when clients learned about the criminal convictions. Robert, I need to ask you something, and I'll understand if you say no. The company is struggling to recover from what Marcus did. Our reputation is damaged, employee morale is terrible, and I'm too old to rebuild what my son destroyed. He paused, and I could hear him taking a deep breath. I want to offer you Derek's position as operations supervisor, with full authority over hiring, benefits administration, and employee relations. The board has already approved the salary range, and all your pension benefits would vest immediately. I was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the past year. The betrayal, the investigation, the trial, the vindication. I thought about the 17 other employees who'd been targeted, and the ones who might be targeted in the future if Peterson Manufacturing didn't fundamentally change its culture. Tom, I'm interested, but I have conditions that aren't negotiable. Name them. First, we implement transparent benefit protection policies. No employee gets terminated within 6 months of a benefit threshold without board approval and independent review. Second, we establish an employee advocacy position, someone whose only job is protecting workers from management abuse. Third, we create a whistleblower protection program so people can report problems without fear of retaliation. Agree to all of it. One more thing. I want Marcus's termination policies completely reversed. Every employee he targeted gets their full benefits restored, their service records corrected, and compensation for what they lost. Already in progress. The legal settlement requires it, but I wanted to do it anyway. 6 months later, I was back in Peterson Manufacturing, but this time I was sitting in the corner office that used to belong to Derek Walsh. The view from the window showed the production floor, where I'd spent nearly 30 years, where guys I'd trained were building products that would last for decades. The company had recovered faster than anyone expected. Employee morale was higher than it had been in years. Turnover had dropped to almost zero, and we'd won back most of the contracts that were canceled during the scandal. Marcus Peterson was serving his federal sentence at a minimum security facility in Ohio. Derek Walsh was working at a hardware store in another state, permanently banned from HR work. The bookshelf I'd built for my daughter was finished, solid oak with hand-cut joints that would last for generations. As I loaded it into my truck, I thought about the difference between building something that endures and tearing down what others had created. Marcus Peterson had tried to destroy my future to save his company a few dollars. Instead, he destroyed his own future and given me the opportunity to build something better than what existed before. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. Sometimes it's proving that you can build what they try to tear down stronger and better than it ever was.